Story recap. The story begins in a dense, shadowy forest where a solitary man lives in an old black van. This man has a secret and spends his nights moving silently through the forest, haunted by memories of his past. Meanwhile, Sophie, an aspiring writer, leaves her small town to pursue her dreams in the city. On her way, her car breaks down in the forest, leaving her stranded and without a cell signal. As she waits for help, a menacing man in a battered truck arrives and offers assistance. However, Sophie quickly realizes something is off and tries to escape. In her desperate attempt to flee, she stumbles upon the black van, seeking refuge from the danger she just escaped. And now our story continues. She reached the van and pounded on the door. Out of breath, her voice was barely a whisper. "Help me, please." A man dressed in cargo pants, wearing a dark t-shirt and sturdy, well-worn boots slid open the door, the creak of the hinges breaking the silence of the night. The man frowned. "What do you want?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. Sophie stood on unsteady legs, her voice trembling. "Please, I need help. My car broke down. There's a man following me. He tried to attack me." "Go away," he said as he started to pull the door closed. The woman flinched at his words, but she didn't move. "Please," she pleaded, putting out her hand to grab the door, keeping it from closing. "Leave," he commanded, his voice echoing through the forest. She stared at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "No," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I can't go back out there. That man, he's dangerous." The man sighed. Sophie watched as the stranger stepped out of the van, his movements deliberate and controlled. The night was calm, the full moon casting a silvery glow over the landscape. As he moved around the van, Sophie noticed a change in his demeanour. His posture stiffened and his eyebrows furrowed, scanning the surroundings with heightened alertness. Suddenly he stopped, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. Sophie followed his line of sight and felt a chill run down her spine. There, partially obscured by the shadows, was the man who had been following her. His presence was menacing, and the memory of their previous encounter flooded back, filling her with fear. The stranger from the van stood still, his eyes locked on the intruder. The tension in the air was palpable, and Sophie could sense the impending confrontation. She held her breath, unsure of what would happen next, but knowing that the situation was far from over. "Get over here!" The bearded man following her barked, his voice rough and filled with malice. Spit flew from his mouth as he spoke, his gaze never leaving Sophie. He seemed to ignore the stranger standing next to Sophie, his focus solely on the terrified woman. Sophie took a step back. The man's demands continued. She glanced at the stranger now standing next to her, hoping for some form of intervention, but his expression remained unchanged. The bearded man took another step closer, his eyes crazed, spittle running down the side of his mouth. "I said, get over here," he repeated, his voice growing louder. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness amplifying the tension. The stranger next to her moved with alarming speed, his grip firm as he grabbed Sophie by the arm. She barely had time to react before he thrust her towards the van, the force of his actions leaving her momentarily stunned. The door of the van swung open, and with a swift, almost brutal motion he pushed her inside. Sophie stumbled, her body hitting the interior with a thud, the pain radiating through her limbs. The stranger's cold, emotionless gaze bore into her as he slammed the door shut, trapping her inside the confined space. Sophie groaned as she slowly got up, her body aching from being thrown into the van. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through her muscles, and she winced as she tried to find a more comfortable position. The rough treatment had left her bruised and sore, and the confined space of the van only added to her discomfort. She leaned against the side of the van, taking deep breaths. She strained her ears, trying to make sense of the sounds coming from outside. The muffled sounds of a struggle reached her ears, the grunts and rustling of leaves indicating that something was happening just beyond her sight. Sophie pressed her ear against the van door, hoping to catch more details, but the thick metal walls made it difficult to discern anything clearly. Her heart pounded as she listened intently. The uncertainty of what was happening outside only added to her sense of vulnerability. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the commotion outside stopped, plunging the surroundings into an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was almost more unsettling than the noise had been, leaving her with a sense of dread. She couldn't see anything from inside the van, and the fear of the unknown gnawed at her. The stranger from the van opened the driver's side door and climbed in. He started the engine, the van rumbling to life, and began to drive off. Sophie, still reeling from the sudden silence and the fear of the unknown, called out to him. "What happened? What's going on? Where are you going?" she asked, her voice filled with anxiety and confusion. The man didn't say anything, his expression cold. He kept his focus on the road, ignoring her questions. The tension inside the van was palpable, and Sophie felt a surge of frustration and fear. "Hey, can you hear me? What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in desperation. When he still didn't respond, Sophie climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes wide with fear and anger. As she looked at him, she noticed his intense and emotionless gaze, his strikingly blue eyes framed by heavy eyebrows. His jaw was set, and his lips were pressed into a thin line, giving him an intimidating and unapproachable demeanour. "Hey!" she shouted, hoping to get his attention. But the man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The lack of answers only made Sophie feel trapped and helpless. Instinctively, she reached for the door handle and attempted to open it, only to find it locked. A new wave of anxiety surged through her as she realised she was trapped inside the van. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe.